Hey guys, welcome to the November 2015 edition of Commander on a Budget on the Neat Zone Magic channel. This is a monthly video series I do wherein I discuss a budget commander deck, usually a pretty interesting commander, and the decks are usually fairly cheap for a commander deck. This one, for example, is less than 20 tickets. And if you want to see the deck list, it should be in the description. And this month we're doing Zada Hedron Grinder, a new commander. I wanted to do, one of the new creatures that comes out. I try to do that usually. I did Chandra last time when Origins came out, so I've done 2 red ones in a row. Next time I probably won't do a red one. But Zada I thought was too interesting and unique for me to want to pick any other new legend in the set. It's a 4-mana 3/3. It's also a goblin, which is relevant. And anytime you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets her, you copy that spell for each other creature you control that the spell could target. So basically, if you cast a pump spell or any other spell that targets Zada, you can then have it target your whole team. So basically, she puts you into a deck where you want to have tons of ways to generate lots of creatures and go wide, and a deck where you want to have lots of combat tricks. The deck I ended up making is one that has a little bit of a goblin sub-theme in it as well. That just happens because red produces more goblin tokens than anything else, and Zada herself is a goblin. So there's a little bit of goblin tribal stuff going on, but mostly the deck tries to go wide with tokens, and then use one spell usually to destroy the opponent. Hopefully this will happen when I'm recording, but I've actually managed to do over 150 damage to someone. My opponent had actually gained a huge amount of life, and I was able to bring them back down and kill them with this deck because I went so wide on them, and then used, I believe, I don't remember which, probably something like Balduvian Rage because it's kind of ridiculous. But anyway, I have things divided into piles here. The pile here with the 18 above it are basically win conditions. Some of them also generate card advantage. They're the combat tricks and spells that we want to use to pump our entire team by targeting Zada. So they're generally extremely efficient. I'll talk about those. The second pile is all creatures that help me go wide, and this third pile is basically just, things that are staples that work in the deck, in any red deck really, I would put in most red decks that I build. But first we'll start with all these combat tricks. The first of these we have is Blood Frenzy. It can give +4/+0 to my entire team for only 2 mana, with the downside that it will then destroy all my creatures. I include it in the deck because it can be a win condition, but also because it's one of the few ways that red has to actually destroy a creature. I actually only found it because I was building this deck, but it's not a bad card in general for red, since you can actually use it to kill an attacking or blocking creature your opponent controls. They do get the +4/+0 first, but then it dies, so it has flexibility in addition to being a win condition. Brute Force, 1 mana to give +3/+3 to the whole team. That's incredibly efficient when you have a bunch of tokens in play. Crimson Wisps is one of the cards. I mentioned cards that are kind of more about drawing me a bunch of cards, getting me card advantage, and Crimson Wisps is mostly that. For 1 red mana, I get to draw as many cards as I have creatures in play, which is pretty ridiculous. Something important to note that I didn't mention with Zada is, even if the spell I cast is countered, or Zada is destroyed in response to me targeting Zada, the rest of my entire team gets the bonus, because it's whenever I cast the spell. So that's something important to keep in mind that adds, extra durability to this deck when it seems like it might be pretty fragile. The fact is that if you have one of these pump cards in your hand and 6 or 7 goblins in play, you may have close to lethal damage, because you can just target Zada and your opponent can't really do anything to stop it, other than blowing up your whole board. But anyway, Crimson Wisps draws a bunch of cards. Sometimes the haste is also relevant. Some turns you'll create a bunch of goblin tokens, and being able to attack with all of them right away is good, but also is drawing like 12 cards. We also have Dynacharge, gives +2/+0, and it's nice because it has the flexibility of Overload, so if I've lost Zada one way or another, I can at least still pump my whole team with it. Hearth Charm is a card that actually doesn't work with Zada's ability, but it works with the general theme of the deck, by either making my whole team unblockable, except for Zada, since she has more than 2 power, by giving my whole team +1/+0 if that's all I need to win, and it also has the flexibility of destroying an artifact creature. Then we have Panic, another card mostly used to draw me a bunch of cards. For 1 red mana, get to draw a card for each creature I control on the next turn's upkeep, which will be my opponent's turn usually. But I can also use it in an emergency situation where I need to get one blocker out of the way to win. We also have Reckless Charge, one of the few sorceries in the deck. I mostly like to surprise my opponent with these spells, but Reckless Charge is good because it gives +3/+0 to my whole team and haste for only 1 red mana, but also because it has flashback. So if you have 4 mana, you can pump your whole team +6/+0, which is pretty close to the most efficient thing in this deck. Then we have Rouse the Mob, 1 mana for +2/+0. We already did Reckless Charge. Titan Strength +3/+1 for 1 red mana, and it can let me scry. Accelerate, another one meant mostly to draw me a bunch of cards, but occasionally also has additional upside in allowing me to give my whole team haste. Fists of the Anvil, another spell that can just add a colossal amount of damage to your creatures at instant speed, and your opponent really can't do anything about it, even if they counter, the Fists of the Anvil. Fury Charm, another flexible one, but this one at least actually works with Zada. It's nice because it can destroy an artifact, but it's also nice because it can give +1/+1 and trample to my whole team if I have Zada in play. It also has the occasional upside of removing time counters from people. Teamer Battle Rage gives my whole team double strike, which, it's mostly only amazing if I have other creatures in play. I mean, if I've used another one of these combat tricks, giving everyone double strike isn't that scary, but sometimes even giving, 11 1/1 goblins double strike when your opponent decided not to block them can be pretty devastating. So, that's 22 damage instead of 11. Sure Strike, 2 mana for +3/+0. That's a new addition from the same set as Zada. Twin Flame, this is one of the more interesting cards in the deck, and one of the ones that can be more devastating for my opponent. It lets me put a copy of every creature I have in play into play, and it does get exiled on my next turn, but I have a number of creatures in the deck, as you'll see when we look at the list of token generators. I have a number of creatures with enter the battlefield abilities who put tokens into play or what have you, and Twin Flame's pretty ridiculous when you have that going on as well. Plus Twin Flame followed by like Titan Strength is also pretty devastating. The 3 cards I have left here are probably the 3 ideal win conditions for the deck because they're just so powerful. The first of them is Downhill Charge, which can be free, so the opponent can really not expect it, and you can also use it after another trick. And it gives +X/+0 to my whole team, where X is the number of mountains I control, which is going to be a lot usually by the time I'm deciding to cast Downhill Charge. And it can just be devastating because the opponent doesn't expect it when it costs 0 mana at times. Balduvian Rage is one of the other really crazy ones. It's one of the few that actually has a legitimate effect in addition to drawing me a bunch of cards. And that's what it does. It gives +X/+0, so whatever I want it to be, if I pay 7 mana, it'll be 6, and I'll draw a card for each creature I control, basically. And Blazing Shoal is another one that's free at times, and is also an X, so it can be any amount of pump, but it can also, as I said, be free, surprising the opponent and catching them off guard in a situation where, say, I've already tapped out or something like that, and can just let me, plow through my opponent. All right, now we'll talk about the token generators and also the cards with goblin themes in general, because most of the tokens the deck makes are goblins, so I have some goblin tribal stuff, as I said. First, we have a Crowan Crusader. Just a little caveat or side note here is that when I first thought I was going to build a Zada deck, I thought, man, it'd be awesome to put all these heroic cards in it. Until you actually read what heroic says, you have to actually cast the spell targeting the Crusader for it to put the 1/1 red soldier creature token onto the battlefield. So that means if I choose Zada as my target, the Crowan Crusader will get the bonus, but it won't put the token into play. But the Crusader's nice to have because in the early game, it gives me a potential threat and can make tokens if I need to. At the same time, I can pump it. Goblin War Chief is good because we will be making several Goblin tokens. Also makes Zada cost 1 less and gives her haste. And all the Goblin tokens will have haste, and that's pretty nice. Dragon Master Outcast, just a good card in general. Probably good for most red decks, but it's especially good in this deck where, going wide is even better than usual, and it puts a 5/5 dragon into play if I have 6 or more lands, and, that's good anyway, but especially when you can pump your whole team. Warbreak Trumpeter, a morph guy who puts X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield, so you have to, if you pay 5 mana, he puts 2 goblins into play, which isn't amazing, but in this deck it's actually pretty good, because he's, also him play himself, and if you have a huge amount of mana, it can be awesome. Like, if you have 11 mana, then that's pretty great. Dragon Fodder, I'm sure you all know, 2 mana for 2/1/1 goblins. Krenko's Command is the exact same card except for the name. Mog War Marshal, just an amazing goblin in general, but one that can make 2 goblin tokens, one when it dies and one when it enters the battlefield, and it has echo, so I can just get 2 goblin tokens pretty easily out of it. Young Pyromancer, a popular card in Constructed, and it's good in this deck. It has synergies both with the fact that I play lots of instants and sorceries, and with the fact that it makes tokens, so it's pretty great in this deck. It's also, in addition to a lot of goblins, there are several Thopter tokens in this deck because of Origins introduced a bunch of them in red. So we have Gear Per Gear Crafter, who goes wide with Thopters in the air. Then there's Goblin Marshal, another goblin guy who has Echo, puts goblins into play when he comes into play and dies, so he can help you go wide. Chancellor of the Forge is one of the more devastating cards we can play. It's one of them that has a ridiculous enters the battlefield ability, so if we play Twin Flame, it's completely ridiculous, but when it enters the battlefield, I get a 1/1 red goblin creature token with haste for each creature I control. And this deck's trying to make a lot of creatures already, so it's usually going to be a lot if things are going our way. And in addition to that, at the beginning of the game, he can give me a free goblin token if he's in my hand, and that's cool. Goblin Matron can be used to search out whatever goblin I need. I usually find myself finding the card just below it. Siege Gang Commander, because it's just so powerful. It helps you go wide, and then it can also turn every single goblin you have into a shock to your opponent's dome or their creatures. Goblin Rally, another card that just generates goblin tokens. Flame Rush Rider is good because it helps me go wide. It can do so as a surprise with its dash, and I have lots of creatures with enters the battlefield abilities, many of which we've already seen, and it's good with all of those. I have Mog Infestation in here. It sort of has a dual purpose. It's flexible. I can destroy all my own creatures and double the number of creatures I have in play, and then play Zada, for example, and then, decimate my opponent. But in emergency situations, too, I can blow up, 2 or 3 of my opponent's creatures and give them 6 goblin tokens when the creatures they had in play were a big problem. Thopter Engineer, another one that helps you go wide with Thopter tokens. Pia and Kiron Nalar, the same thing, but it also turns every artifact into a shock. Krenko Mob Boss, just, is amazing in this deck. It lets you make huge numbers of goblins and just destroy your opponent with them. Goblin Chieftain, a Goblin Lord. It gives them all haste and +1/+1, which is relevant in general going wide in this deck. I have Charmbreaker Devils here. It mostly has synergy with the instants and sorceries that I use to pump the whole team because it just lets me get them back over and over again. But I have it here because even though it doesn't make tokens and it's not a goblin, it has special synergies with this deck. Goblin King, another Goblin Lord. This one gives Mountain Walk, which is relevant at times. Hammer of Perforos is nice, gives my creatures haste, also helps me go wide with golems in this case. Beetleback Chief, another goblin that puts more goblins into play as an enter the battlefield abilities. Hordling Outburst puts goblins into play. Empty the Warrens. Usually I can get it to put 4 goblins into play, at least sometimes more if my opponent played an instant. Ib Halfheart Goblin Tactician is another good one to search for at times with the Matron because I can just sacrifice all my mountains and tap all my mana first. Make my board huge and swing with a bunch of hasty goblins and pump everything up. So if you feel like a win is possible, it's pretty great. It also makes it really hard for your opponent to block in general, your goblins. Then we have Mirror Battlesphere, who puts Mirror into play, but also has an ability that can just damage the opponent, and that's pretty good. Thopter Assembly puts a bunch of Thopters into play, and Precursor Golem is kind of like a mini Zada for all your golems, and it puts 2 of them into play itself. So that's pretty sweet. And then I'll just talk about the staple cards real quickly. We have our usual Lightning Bolt. Vandal Blast is a good card to have in every red deck because it can nuke all your opponent's artifacts. Roast, likewise, is a pretty good card to have in any red deck, as is Chaos Warp because it can deal with any permanent. Outpost Siege is good in any red deck because it basically draws you an extra card. Aftershock I like in a budget deck, especially just because it's so flexible, destroying an artifact, creature, or land. Chandra Nalar, one of the few affordable planeswalkers. Mob Rule is pretty fun in any red deck, but in this deck, you can steal all your opponent's creatures and then pump them all, and that's pretty heinous. Rolling Thunder, just a good card to have to wipe my opponent's board or finish them off if necessary. Comet Storm, same thing. Then we have the usual Mana Vault. Skull Clamp is really good in this deck, because I can make every 1/1 goblin I have into drawing me 2 cards for 1 mana. Soul Ring, like in any commander deck. Felwar Stone is a good little mana rock. I don't have a huge number in here because our curve's actually relatively low. And then we have Champion's Helm to protect Zada. Also talk about the lands real quick. Barbarian Ring should probably be really in any red deck because it can turn into a shock. Foundry of the Consuls is a land that helps us go wide by putting Thopters into play. Get to Encampment. Man lands are nice in this deck because they also get the benefit from Zada. Hammerheim, another card that, there's no real reason not to play it because sometimes its ability is relevant, especially because sometimes we'll give our opponent's goblins Mountain Walk and we can take it away. The Megaliths, another one that just has utility. Same with Keldon Necropolis. We can sack all of our goblins if we want to. We also have Reliquary Tower because this deck does sometimes exceed maximum hand size. Shinka to give Zada first strike, or Ib Halfheart, I guess. Sheevan Gorge to just damage our opponent slowly, and Spawning Bed to also help us go wide. So that's the deck as a whole. It's a really fun deck to play. I will show you real quickly that the deck costs less than 15 tickets as of early November 2015. This has all the cards in it. And Champion's Helm is about a third of the entire deck's cost. So if you don't want to run Champion's Helm, it really only costs about 10 tickets, although I would recommend it because protecting Zada makes things even meaner for your opponent. So that's the deck. I'll now play 3 games with it, and I hope you'll enjoy them. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like,